Hello, everybody. My name is Mark Greisiger with NetDiligence. I have the great fortune today of speaking with a friend of mine, Chris Dilenno, who's a partner at Mullen Coughlin. Chris, I feel like I've known you for my whole life. I don't know why that is. We've talked for many times over the years. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Pleasure.
So Chris, one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you today is when we last caught up over a breakfast meeting, you mentioned an interesting topic to me, and I thought it'd be good we can kind of tease that out here today. Both NetDiligence and Mullen Coughlin, we both support the same cyber risk insurance community out there. We support carriers, you support carriers, but in different ways. And so we're, really the mission for this interview and the blogs that we do is to really keep our insurance partners up to date on what the trends experts like yourself are seeing. And that could be the underwriters, the claims folks, it can be the broker community, it can be the actual risk managers too who buy the cyber insurance. So I wanted to talk a little bit about fines and penalties. Of course, that component is picked up under most cyber policies, but for some reason you read a lot about ransomware and these other things that are happening every day. But let's talk a little, what you're seeing, what you and your team are seeing as far as company has anemic security that may have led to a breach or ransomware or something like that, and some state AG or something federal enforcer comes after them. What's your team seeing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. It is interesting because it doesn't get the same kind of airplay as the ransomware and just sort of cybersecurity in general, but there's a lot of activity going on with the regulators these days. I mean, the word I'd use to sum it up is the word more. There are more regulators taking an active role in response to incident reporting and cybersecurity in general. There are more questions that they're asking and more detailed investigations that they're conducting, and just more investigations that they're conducting. So it's not only the same regulators that we've seen for years, like California, New York, Florida, Massachusetts. They're conducting more investigations themselves, but there are more and more regulators joining the fray. There's Colorado, New Jersey, Vermont, Washington State. We're just starting to see much more activity. Indiana, I can't forget them. They're asking a lot more questions as well. It's just more.
So if let's just stay on that point right there. Let's assume a customer has some kind of a breach. I mean, many of the breaches become almost national because the victims reside in many different states, not just where the company's based. If that were to happen, is there any of the state AGs or enforcers that you think are, they're becoming kind of leaders as far as enforcement goes?
Yeah, I mean, Indiana has always been a leader. They are consistently asking follow-up questions for years now, and they continue to do so. What we're seeing there is their questions are becoming more in depth, and I think along the same lines, what we've seen in Colorado and New Jersey is the attorneys general are enforcing HIPAA. So the HIPAA law is allowed to be enforced by state attorneys general, and they're doing so, and that is leading to very significant investigations for covered entities, hospitals and other HIPAA covered entities that experience a breach and make a report. So we've always been investigated by HHS. That's another regulator that's just always been there, and they consistently investigate any matter that affects 500 or more people. But the state requirements also require notice to their attorneys general at the same time. And those attorneys general are being, a little more active. I don't want to call them aggressive. I think they're just doing their job, but they're doing their job more frequently, and they're asking the same types of questions that OCR asks, and even it does lead to fines and penalties and corrective action from the state level.
Yep, and it makes sense when you think about it. I mean, states can be, state of AGs, they feel it's their responsibility to protect citizens and even companies in their state. And cybercrime, as we both know, it's like endless, and it impacts companies almost in every business sector and every size, and it's almost daily. It's like a daily thing. You may not read about in the press every day, but you guys certainly get incidents and claims every day to work to help customers with. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is.
so
It's
so so
growing.
Chris, walk, if you can, walk us through what like an investigation might look like. Something happens, how do you get engaged, and what might be a typical outcome or result?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we have an incident, we have the duty to report to the regulators. Many of them have forms that you have to fill out. So there's basic information you provide about the incident when you're reporting one of these. And it just sort of opens the door to more questions. And what you get is you get a list of questions. There are about 10 questions we can expect in every case. It's things like, what do you do for risk management for the enterprise? Show us your most recent risk management plan, your most recent risk analysis. What are your written information security policies and procedures? What types of training do you conduct for your employees, and how frequently? And these questions they ask, they want to see supporting documentation. They don't just want us to give them a sort of big picture summary of things. They want to see the software that we're using. And they even get very technical now. They're getting more educated, and they're able to, confirm we're encrypting data at rest as well as in transit, what types of monitoring software we have in our network, whether we use multi-factor authentication. So the standards and the sort of best practices out there in the IT world are becoming part of the conversation from the regulators. And so you get, a very thorough look at your organization in response to one of these. And then the outcome, if you have good answers, the outcomes, thanks a lot. We're closing our file. That does happen in most cases. You can put together a good response for many people. But part of that response is often, here are, the 10 holes in our security program that we recognize we have. But because we recognize them, here are the ways we're working on getting them fixed. And here's the timeline. So in other words, you have to make sure you voluntarily show how you're complying with requirements and keeping the place secure. If you don't do that, that's when they dig in and say, we need to whack these guys a bit to get them into shape and make sure they're doing what they need to do. So the outcome can be, a corrective action plan where they're going to ask you to report to them every 6 months or every year. What are your risks? Where are you with mitigating those risks? Where are your compliance items? And shorter deadlines. If you have any type of incident, you may need to report it to the regulator immediately as opposed to within 30 days or 60 days. They're going to be looking over your shoulder every bit of the way. And these corrective action plans can last 5, 7, even 10 years. So it can be pretty significant. Yeah.
It's like an environmental pollution spill. They got, oh my gosh.
It is. It's absolutely like that.
Yeah. So, Chris, is there any of these enforcers that you see over and over that you actually start to develop a little bit of a rapport with? They kind of,
Sure.
That kind of thing might help a policyholder, I guess, if they know, this regulator and what they're looking for, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, I think certainly there's a number of state attorneys general that have been doing this for years, and we interact frequently with them, so we know them really well. I think what that does is it helps us not waste their time. I think a lot of times when you're putting these together for the first time, you're throwing a kitchen sink at them, and it can overwhelm them, and they don't appreciate that. So we know how to sort of organize what they're looking for and make sure we recognize the holes before they have to point them out. Those are the kinds of sort of background relationship issues that help make a good answer.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about fines and penalties as far as the severity of those kind of penalties, the costs and things. Like, what are you seeing? And is there certain sectors or data types or even like anemic actions that happen that can drive the costs up? That kind of.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. It's the anemic response that I think gets them fired up and leaning towards fines, or it's just the egregious set of facts. I mean, maybe there are just so many areas where they need to improve. It's just clear that the client was way behind the curve, and there's not much you can do to make that look pretty when you provide that response. So you can expect a fine. But what it can lead to, I mean, there was a recent announcement in New Jersey. The New Jersey AG fined someone $500,000 in a response The matter affected 11,000 New Jersey residents, so not a huge impact on the state, but it was a lot of data. It was a lot more people involved in the incident. They were enforcing HIPAA, and they came up with a $500,000 fine. I mean, most state fines are smaller than that. They're more like $25,000, $50,000, and they do often go along with a corrective action where they're going to require you to submit some information down the road. But I think you do have to be concerned about multi-$100,000 fines, even at the state level. There's been historically fines in that range from New York, Indiana, California, Florida. There are big fines out there. And as far as industry goes, certainly the healthcare industry generally is a lot of different players, and that's not just hospitals, but it's insurance plans, and employers have insurance plans, and that brings them into the HIPAA world. So there's sort of a lot of different types of entities, and it ends up being a big driver of the HIPAA requirements, especially because they can be enforced by the state as well. And then of course financial. When you have financial services, you're going to attract a lot of concern. If there's a big event, you should be ready for some attorney general potential fines if there's egregious facts there.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to pivot over to, if a customer, a cyber policyholder, is looking to be proactive and not run afoul of a regulator either beforehand or really, let's talk more afterwards. What would be some of your recommendations to that policyholder?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the smartest thing you can do is ask yourself, what would I do if I was audited today? Put yourself through that process before you have to. That's essentially conducting a risk analysis, looking holistically at the organization, and finding the holes. But it is something that's good to be guided by an expert. So there are IT aspects to this where you can have an IT specialist conduct a risk assessment, find out all the technical vulnerabilities. They'll also look at your general protocols and policies related to IT. But you want to holistically look at this. There's also just training and development of policies and procedures, and how often the organization updates those. You need sort of administrative steps in the background. So we often engage with our clients to conduct these risk analysis and essentially conduct an audit, find out all of the areas that need mitigation, and get a plan together for mitigating those. If you're in that sort of posture and then something happens and you have to report to a regulator, you're sort of doing all you can. Of course, you don't want to have a lot of holes, and if there's some technical, just big gaps, you need to plug them. But if you're doing your best practices on the IT side, and you're actively involved in ensuring that you're up to compliance standards, a few faults here and there aren't going to be the end of the world. And that's what makes all the difference, is really engagement with the issues and working towards improving at all times.
Yep. Thank you, Chris. So, I'll kind of end on this. One of the things we chatted about was in more of the proactive area, have an incident response plan ready to go at a moment's notice in case something happens. And in there, of course, it should be the Mullen Coughlin hotline number. So a customer can find you guys at 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday, quickly raise your team, get some advice, and then your team helps them triage from there, bringing in experts as needed and holding their hand the whole way. So.
Yeah, and that's a great point. That's sort of out of the gate. You have an incident. If you respond well to that incident, it says volumes about your posture and your security generally. If you don't know what to do when an incident happens, you're reporting it 2 months after it happens, and you still haven't gotten notice to the affected individuals, just a bad incident response speaks volumes to the regulators regarding what do they have going on behind the scenes. So absolutely, incident response plan is sort of the low-hanging fruit, best starting point. Make sure you can adapt when an incident happens, because it's almost impossible to avoid any incident.
Yeah, cool. Chris, we'll end there. Thank you so much. I love talking with you about these things. Every time we speak, I learn something. So it was good. It's good seeing you, even though it's through Zoom. We do, just for the audience, we do actually see each other in person. over breakfast once in a while and chit chat. So if you can learn more about Chris at, of course, the Mullen Coughlin website, mullen.law, and Chris and his partners, Jen Coughlin and John Mullen, and his other partners are often speakers at the NetDiligence Cyber Summit conferences. We have lots of content on their firm and their experts inside eRisk Hub portal you can find. And with that, Chris, thank you and have a wonderful week.
You too, Mark. It was a pleasure. Thank you.